The telegram arrived in the late afternoon of May 29th, 1941. It carried no urgency, demanded no investigation, prompted no headlines beyond a modest notice in the obituary columns. Charles Curtis Alderton, 83 years old, had died quietly in his home on that warm Thursday, attended only by his second wife, Emily. The cause was recorded as natural. There was nothing remarkable about the death itself. What was remarkable was the silence that surrounded it. Alderton had lived in Waco for more than half a century. He had walked its dusty streets when the cattle drives still passed through, had watched the railroad transform the town into a commercial crossroads, had witnessed the rise of an empire built on carbonated water and fruit syrup. That empire bore a name recognized across the nation, Dr. Pepper, and Alderton had given it life. Yet when he died, no corporate delegation arrived to pay respects. No industry publication marked his passing as the loss of a founding figure. The Masonic Lodge conducted his burial services the following day at Oakwood Cemetery, and within a week, the world had largely forgotten that Charles Alderton had ever existed. The building at the corner of 5th Street and Mary Avenue stood less than a quarter-mile from where Alderton was laid to rest. 3 stories of yellow brick, 18-inch walls, a tile roof designed by architect Milton Scott. The Artesian Manufacturing and Bottling Company had constructed it in 1906, and for nearly 60 years afterward, the machinery inside would fill thousands of bottles each day with the dark, sweet liquid that Alderton had first mixed in the back of a drugstore. On the day of his funeral, those machines continued their work without pause. This was not an oversight. It was the natural consequence of a history that had been, from its earliest moments, fragmented and obscured. The official narrative, the one printed on promotional materials and repeated to journalists, offered a simple origin story. In 1885, a young pharmacist working at Morrison's Old Corner Drugstore in downtown Waco had experimented with fruit syrups at the soda fountain. He had created something new, something that customers began requesting by name. The drink spread from one fountain to another, then to bottles, then to the wider world. The pharmacist's name was Charles Alderton. The store owner's name was Wade Morrison. A beverage chemist named Robert Lazenby had helped transform the local curiosity into a commercial enterprise. Together, these 3 men had birthed a soft drink that would outlive all of them. But even this simple account carried contradictions that no one seemed eager to resolve. Alderton had invented the formula, yet he never profited from it substantially. He had given the recipe to Morrison, who had given it a name whose origins remained disputed decades later. Morrison and Lazenby had formed the Artesian Manufacturing and Bottling Company in 1891, yet Alderton's role in that company was negligible. He had chosen, by all accounts, to remain a pharmacist rather than a soft drink magnate. The official version treated this decision as a matter of personal preference, a humble man content with his modest station. The unofficial version was more difficult to locate. Company records from the earliest years had been lost, damaged, or simply never created with any rigor. The precise terms under which Alderton relinquished his claim to the formula were never documented in any surviving legal instrument. The question of who truly named the drink and why the name Dr. Pepper was chosen generated more than a dozen conflicting stories, none of which could be verified with primary sources. The most persistent legend involved a Virginia physician named Charles Pepper and a romantic entanglement with his daughter, but census records would later reveal that the daughter in question had been a child of 8 when Morrison supposedly departed Virginia with a broken heart. What remained then was not a history, but an accumulation of gaps. The drink existed, the building existed, the men who had made them possible were dead or dying, and the empire they had built continued to expand without any of them, propelled by forces that had long since outgrown their individual contributions. On the evening of May 30th, 1941, as the sun set over Waco and the last of the mourners departed Oakwood Cemetery, the bottling plant on 5th Street shut down for the night. The machines fell silent. The workers went home. And somewhere in the darkness of that empty building, the artesian well that had supplied water to the operation for 35 years continued its slow, patient flow, indifferent to the man who had been buried that day, indifferent to the questions his death would never answer. America's oldest major soft drink had survived its creator. It would survive much more in the decades to come, but the story of how it came to be, and what that story concealed, would remain, like the formula itself, a closely guarded secret. Waco in 1885 was a town convinced of its own destiny. The railroads had arrived, bringing commerce, ambition, and a population that had swelled past 10,000 souls. Cotton moved through its streets in great quantities. The Brazos River carved its slow path nearby, and beneath the surface of the city, something valuable was revealing itself. Water, warm, mineral-rich, rising under its own pressure from deep aquifers, had been discovered. Within a few years, wells would be sunk throughout downtown, some reaching depths of 1,800 feet. The city would call itself Geyser City, and entrepreneurs would build natatoriums and hotels to attract visitors seeking the purported healing properties of the artesian springs. It was into this atmosphere of speculation and possibility that Charles Alderton arrived. He had come from Galveston, where a fire had destroyed his small flavor extract business earlier that year. At 27, he found employment at Morrison's Old Corner Drugstore, located at 4th Street and Austin Avenue. The store was owned by Wade Morrison, a Virginian who had come to Texas by way of Austin. Morrison ran a respectable establishment, display cases filled with medicines, a soda fountain that served as a gathering point for the community. The soda fountain was where Alderton spent much of his time when he was not compounding prescriptions. In the 1880s, carbonated beverages occupied a strange middle ground between medicine and refreshment. Pharmacists routinely mix syrups with carbonated water, offering drinks flavored with sarsaparilla, lemon, and various fruit extracts. The flavors were familiar, the formulas unremarkable. Alderton began to consider whether something different might be achieved. The precise sequence of his experiments would never be fully documented. What survives are fragments, a journal, some say, though its contents remain disputed, a reference to 23 ingredients, though the specific components were never revealed. Alderton had noticed that the drugstore smelled of many things at once, the mingling of fruit syrups, spices, and extracts. He set out to capture that complexity in liquid form. He mixed, he adjusted, and eventually he produced something that tasted like nothing else being served at any soda fountain in Texas. The customers who tried it asked for more. They called it a Waco. They told their neighbors. Other fountain operators in the city began requesting the syrup. By the end of 1885, Morrison had applied for a patent, listing December 1st as the official date of creation. He also gave the drink a name, Dr. Pepper, though the reasons for this choice would become one of the most contested questions in the history of American beverages. The most enduring legend involved a Virginia physician named Charles Pepper and a romantic attachment to his daughter. According to this story, Morrison had once courted the girl, but had been rejected by her father, and naming the drink was either an act of tribute or an attempt at reconciliation. The story possessed sentimental appeal useful for marketing. It was also, by all available evidence, false. Census records would later reveal that the daughter had been 8 years old when Morrison left Virginia. The Dr. Pepper Museum would eventually collect more than a dozen competing origin stories, none verifiable with primary sources. What mattered more to Morrison was the commercial potential. Demand was outstripping the capacity of the old corner drugstore to produce syrup. He needed a partner with expertise in bottling. He found one in Robert Lazenby, a young beverage chemist who had come to Waco from Paris, Texas. Lazenby had already established the Circle A Ginger Ale Company in 1884 and was familiar with preserving carbonated beverages for sale in bottles. He tasted Alderton's creation and recognized its potential immediately. In 1891, Morrison and Lazenby formed the Artesian Manufacturing and Bottling Company. The name was deliberate, a claim on the waters that had made Waco famous. The company would produce Dr. Pepper alongside Circle A Ginger Ale and other beverages, though none would achieve the same success. Charles Alderton was not a partner in this venture. By 1891, he had made a decision that would shape the rest of his life. He did not wish to be a soft drink magnate. He wished to remain what he had always been, a pharmacist, a chemist, a man who worked with formulas and compounds. He turned over the enterprise to Morrison and Lazenby and stepped away from the business. The terms of this arrangement were never recorded in any surviving document. Whether Alderton received compensation, and if so how much, remains unknown. What is known is that by the time the Artesian Manufacturing and Bottling Company began operations, Alderton's role in the story of Dr. Pepper was essentially complete. He would live another 50 years in Waco, raising a family, joining the Masonic Lodge, and watching from a distance as the drink he had created spread first across Texas, then across the nation. The years between 1891 and 1904 were years of consolidation. Robert Lazenby, who had assumed primary control of the Artesian Manufacturing and Bottling Company, proved to be a meticulous businessman. His background as a beverage chemist gave him advantages that Morrison did not possess. Lazenby understood the fragility of carbonated drinks, the way heat could destroy a formula that tasted perfect from the fountain, but turned flat in a sealed bottle. He adjusted the recipe for shelf stability. He added caffeine. Despite contemporary concerns, early advertisements had proudly declared the drink free from any injurious substance. The market demanded energy, and Lazenby gave it to them. By the turn of the century, Dr. Pepper had established itself as a regional success. Other soda fountains throughout Texas purchased the syrup, but Lazenby understood that regional success was not enough. Coca-Cola, formulated in Atlanta just 1 year after Dr. Pepper's debut, was already pushing beyond the South. If Dr. Pepper was to survive against such competition, it needed exposure on a scale that Texas alone could not provide. The opportunity arrived in 1904. The Louisiana Purchase Exposition, commonly known as the St. Louis World's Fair, was scheduled to open that spring, celebrating the centennial of the territory's acquisition and showcasing American progress to an international audience. Over the course of 7 months, nearly 20 million visitors would pass through its gates. Lazenby recognized this as the moment to introduce Dr. Pepper to the world. The preparation began years in advance. In 1901, Lazenby opened a bottling facility in St. Louis, ensuring sufficient quantities would be available. By the time the exposition gates opened in late April of 1904, Dr. Pepper had secured permits to operate at soda fountains and concession stands throughout the fairgrounds. The fair itself was a spectacle of invention and consumption. Hamburgers served on buns, ice cream cones, cotton candy, iced tea offered to fairgoers exhausted by the summer heat. Dr. Pepper joined this parade of novelty. The drink's flavor profile, neither cola nor fruit soda, but something more complex, distinguished it from the competition. Lazenby and his son-in-law, J.B. O'Hara, worked the fair personally, ensuring that every opportunity was exploited. The results justified the investment. Within 2 years, the company had outgrown its facilities. In 1906, a new building rose at 5th Street and Mary Avenue in downtown Waco. Designed by architect Milton Scott, the structure was built specifically for Dr. Pepper production. Its walls were 18 inches of solid brick, and at its heart, flowing up through the first floor, was a well that tapped directly into the artesian aquifer that had given the city its nickname. The building represented more than industrial capacity. It was a statement of permanence. Water from the well was pumped to the 3rd floor, purified through distillation, and stored before being mixed with the secret formula. The machinery filled bottles by the thousands each day. Delivery trucks carried the product throughout Central Texas and beyond. Yet even as the company expanded, the mechanisms of secrecy were being established. Lazenby had made a crucial decision in the earliest days. The formula for Dr. Pepper would never be patented. A patent would have required public disclosure of the ingredients, granting protection for only a limited term before the recipe entered the public domain. Secrecy, by contrast, could last forever, provided it was maintained with sufficient rigor. The decision mirrored what Coca-Cola had done with its own formula, and for the same reasons. Mystery had commercial value. The unknown was more compelling than the documented. How many people knew the complete formula at any given time remains unclear. Company lore would later claim that the recipe was divided into 2 parts, each stored in a separate bank vault in Dallas, so that no single individual could possess the whole. Whether this arrangement existed from the beginning or developed later cannot be verified. What is certain is that by the early 20th century, Dr. Pepper had cultivated an aura of secrecy that would become inseparable from its identity. 23 flavors, the marketing would eventually declare. Which 23, the company would never say. Charles Alderton, meanwhile, had returned to Waco after a period in New Orleans. His first wife, Lily, had died in 1916. He remarried in 1918 to a woman named Emily Marie Coquille, whom he had met while working for the Eli Lilly Drug Company. Upon his return, he took a position with the Waco Drug Company, overseeing their laboratory. He was considered one of the leading chemists in the South. His office stood just blocks from the bottling plant, where the drink he had invented was produced in quantities he could never have imagined in 1885. He did not speak publicly about Dr. Pepper. He did not claim credit. He watched and he worked, and he remained silent. The decade following the construction of the 5th Street bottling plant should have been a period of triumph. Instead, it became a study in fragility. The soft drink market was expanding, but so were costs. Commodity prices fluctuated, bottling taxes rose, competition from Coca-Cola, better funded, more aggressively marketed, intensified with each passing year. Robert Lazenby found himself presiding over an organization beginning to buckle under financial strain. In 1920, the Circle A Corporation, Lazenby's holding company, which had purchased the artesian manufacturing and bottling works to consolidate control over Dr. Pepper production, dissolved. The details of what happened remain murky, obscured by the passage of time and the loss of records. Court documents from a subsequent tax dispute reveal that the original Dr. Pepper Company was formally dissolved on December 15th of that year. Lazenby retained the assets of the defunct corporation, but the enterprise that had seemed so promising just a few years earlier had effectively ceased to exist. What followed was a period of reorganization and uncertainty. On June 12, 1923, the Circle A Corporation declared bankruptcy, citing rising commodity prices and crushing bottling taxes. Less than a month later, on July 6th, a new entity emerged from the wreckage. The Dr. Pepper Company was officially incorporated in Dallas under Colorado law, with fresh capital from new investors and a mandate to rebuild what had been lost. The man tasked with this reconstruction was John Bernard O'Hara, Lazenby's son-in-law. O'Hara had come to Texas during the First World War, stationed in Waco for training. There he had met Virginia Lazenby. They married in 1919, and O'Hara entered the family business. When the company relocated to Dallas, O'Hara was named vice president and general manager. He would serve in various leadership capacities for the next 2 decades. The move to Dallas was more than a change of address. It represented a severing of the company's physical connection to its origins. The bottling plant on 5th Street continued to operate. It would do so until the 1960s, but the corporate headquarters had shifted north. Waco became a satellite. The men who had created Dr. Pepper were either dead, retired, or marginalized. Wade Morrison had faded from the narrative. Charles Alderton had never been part of the corporate structure. The company had passed into new hands. In Dallas, the reconstituted Dr. Pepper Company set about the work of survival. The soft drink industry was becoming increasingly dominated by Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola, whose resources dwarfed those of regional competitors. Dr. Pepper's strategy relied on 2 pillars: the uniqueness of its flavor and the ingenuity of its advertising. The flavor required no intervention. It remained what Alderton had created, a blend of 23 ingredients that resisted easy categorization. Neither cola nor fruit soda, it occupied a category of its own. The advertising, however, could be shaped. In 1926, research conducted by Dr. Walter Eddy at Columbia University had identified periods when human blood sugar naturally declined, approximately 10:30 in the morning, 2:30 in the afternoon, and 4:30 in the evening. The company's agency was challenged to develop a campaign around this finding. An employee named Earl Racy proposed a slogan: "Drink a bite to eat at 10, 2, and 4. He received a $25 bonus. The campaign transformed the brand. Bottles were embossed with the numerals 1024. Clock faces appeared on advertisements. The message was simple. Dr. Pepper was not merely a refreshment, but a solution to a biological problem. The slogan would endure for decades, painted on barns across the South, embedded in the consciousness of generations. Yet even as the company prospered, the absence at its center became more pronounced. Coca-Cola had John Pemberton and Asa Candler, figures whose names were invoked in corporate mythology. Dr. Pepper had no equivalent. Charles Alderton was never mythologized. He was never photographed holding a bottle, never quoted in advertisements. He remained in Waco, working as a chemist, his connection to Dr. Pepper acknowledged only in the most perfunctory terms. This absence was not accidental. The company's founding narrative was fragmented, split among Alderton, who invented the formula, Morrison, who named it, and Lazenby, who commercialized it. There was no single founder to celebrate. The romantic legend about Morrison and Dr. Pepper's daughter had been debunked. The truth was messier and less useful for brand building. So Dr. Pepper grew without a founder myth, sustained by its distinctive taste and clever advertising. The formula remained locked away, divided, according to company lore, between 2 separate bank vaults in Dallas. The mystery of its composition became a substitute for the mystery of its creation. Charles Alderton, meanwhile, continued his quiet life in Waco. He remarried. He worked. He attended Masonic Lodge meetings. He never sought recognition and never received it. By the time of his death in 1941, the company he had inadvertently helped create was headquartered 100 miles away, run by men who had never met him. The building on 5th Street remained, filled with machinery and workers and the steady hum of production. But the story had moved on without it. The Second World War brought challenges that the soft drink industry had never anticipated. In 1942, the United States government instituted sugar rationing. Sugar was needed for the manufacture of explosives and for military provisions. Businesses that depended on sugar faced the prospect of collapse. Coca-Cola secured a special dispensation, arguing successfully that its product was essential to troop morale. The company built bottling plants near the front lines and emerged from the war with an international infrastructure and an unassailable market position. Dr. Pepper had no such exemption, but it had a slogan developed 15 years earlier for entirely different purposes. The 10-2-4 campaign, based on Dr. Walter Eddy's research into blood sugar fluctuations, had been designed to encourage habitual consumption. Now it served a different function. The company produced a booklet titled The Liquid Bite, arguing that sugar could act as an energy booster for workers in war production factories. Dr. Pepper was not merely a refreshment, but a form of sustenance, in effect, food. The argument worked. Dr. Pepper secured sufficient sugar rations to continue production. The crisis had been averted. The war years also brought losses that could not be compensated by clever advertising. Robert Bernard O'Hara, the only son of company president J.B. O'Hara, and his wife Virginia Lazenby O'Hara, was killed in action during the conflict. The O'Hara family, which had guided the company since the 1920s, absorbed this tragedy in private. No public statement was made. The work continued. By the time the war ended, the company had outgrown its facilities on 2nd Avenue. In 1945, land was purchased at the corner of Mockingbird Lane and Greenville Road in Dallas. At the time, a location on the edge of the city, surrounded by open country. Construction began the following year. The building that rose on that corner was designed by architects Arthur Thomas and Ralph Merrill in the Art Moderne style. Smooth walls, horizontal emphasis, large expanses of glass, bands of glass blocks designed to catch maximum sunlight and reflect it deep into the interior. The structure measured 4 stories, with approximately 276,000 square feet. It contained administrative offices, syrup compounding facilities, and a complete bottling operation. The lobby featured a curved wall of plate glass between marble columns 22 feet high, adorned with murals by New York artist Arthur Crisp. A clock tower displayed the familiar 10-2-4 numerals. A time and temperature sign became a landmark for generations of Dallas residents. The building opened in 1948, a monument to post-war confidence, a declaration that Dr. Pepper had survived the Depression, survived the war, and was prepared to compete with its larger rivals. Yet even as the company celebrated its new headquarters, the original Waco plant continued its steady work. The building on 5th and Mary Street, with its 18-inch brick walls and Romanesque arches, had been producing Dr. Pepper for more than 4 decades. Workers arrived each morning, operated the bottling lines, loaded trucks, went home. The artesian well still flowed through the first floor, though the famous Waco aquifer had begun to decline in the 1920s and would never fully recover. On May 11, 1953, a tornado touched down southwest of Waco at approximately 4:10 in the afternoon. The funnel was wrapped in heavy rain, rendering it nearly invisible. It moved through the heart of the city at the end of the workday, when downtown streets were crowded. Few buildings had been constructed to withstand such winds. The tornado was later rated F5. It killed 114 people and injured 597 more. 30 died in the R.T. Dennis Furniture Building when it collapsed. Bricks piled 5 feet deep. Some survivors waited more than 14 hours to be rescued. The Dr. Pepper bottling plant survived. Its massive brick walls held. The tornado ripped away a portion of the 3rd-floor roof and tore off sections of the exterior wall. Roll-down doors crumpled, and cases of Dr. Pepper were sucked from the building. One worker, Vernon Powell, was killed seeking shelter in a structure that collapsed. Manager C.D. Harris ordered the employees to take cover beneath the staircase. They lived. Within a week, repairs were complete. The lighter-colored bricks used in the reconstruction remain visible today, a scar marking the building's encounter with the deadliest tornado in Texas history since 1900. At the end of 1953, the Waco Dr. Pepper bottling plant still led all Dr. Pepper bottlers in the country in sales volume, a distinction it had held numerous times before. The work continued. In 1950, the period after Doctor was quietly dropped from the trademark. A redesign of the typeface had made the punctuation difficult to read. Dr. Pepper became Dr. Pepper. The change was cosmetic, but it represented another step away from the drink's origins as a product dispensed by an actual pharmacist. The medical association implied by the name had always been fictitious. Now even the typographical suggestion was erased. The Waco plant continued operating through the 1950s and into the early 60s. But aluminum cans, introduced for soft drinks in the late 50s, were becoming popular. The old building on 5th Street lacked space to accommodate the larger machinery required for can manufacturing. In 1965, production ceased. The company donated the structure to Baylor University, which used it for storage. For the next 2 decades, the building sat vacant in a neighborhood declared blighted. The machinery was removed. The artesian well was kept. The Romanesque arches remained, but the purpose they had been designed to serve was gone. 100 miles to the north in Dallas, the Mockingbird Lane headquarters hummed with activity. The clock tower still displayed its 10-4 face. The time and temperature sign still flashed for passing motorists. The company had survived another transition, left another building behind. The pattern was becoming familiar. The decades that followed the Waco plant's closure were defined by a pattern of ownership that would have been unrecognizable to the men who had created Dr. Pepper. The company passed from hand to hand like a commodity, bought and sold by investors who had no connection to soda fountains or Waco or the artesian wells that had once supplied the bottling operation on 5th Street. In 1984, Dr. Pepper was taken private in a $615 million leveraged buyout by Forstmann Little & Company, a New York investment firm. Assets were stripped to pay down debt. Overhead was cut. The company that had spent decades building a loyal regional following was now a line item on a balance sheet. 2 years later, Coca-Cola attempted to acquire the company. The Federal Trade Commission blocked the deal on antitrust grounds. PepsiCo's simultaneous attempt to purchase the 7-Up company was similarly rejected. The soft drink industry's 2 giants were prevented from absorbing their smaller competitors. Into this vacuum stepped Hicks and Haas, a Dallas investment bank. In August 1986, they purchased Dr. Pepper in another leveraged buyout for $406 million. 3 months later, they acquired the 7-Up company from Philip Morris for $240 million. The 2 brands were merged in 1988 to form Dr. Pepper 7-Up Companies, Incorporated, the 3rd largest soft drink manufacturer in the United States, trailing only Coca-Cola and PepsiCo. The merger made strategic sense. Both companies occupied the non-cola segment of the market, which was growing faster than the cola segment. Together they controlled brands that included Dr. Pepper, Diet Dr. Pepper, 7-Up, Welch's, and IBC. But the combination also represented another step away from the company's origins. Dr. Pepper was no longer a Texas enterprise with roots in a Waco drugstore. It was a component of a portfolio managed by financiers whose primary expertise was in the mechanics of acquisition rather than the subtleties of flavor. In 1995, British confectionery giant Cadbury Schweppes acquired the 74% of Dr. Pepper 7-Up stock it did not already own for $1.7 billion. The company was renamed Cadbury Schweppes, America's Beverages. Headquarters moved to Legacy Drive in Plano, Texas. The Mockingbird Lane building in Dallas, which had served as the company's home since 1948, was sold. It would be demolished in 1997, despite preservation efforts, another landmark erased. Through all these transactions, the formula remained unchanged. The 23 ingredients that Charles Alderton had combined in Morrison's drugstore in 1885 continued to define the product. The mystery of its composition persisted, but the company that controlled that formula bore no resemblance to the enterprise that Alderton, Morrison, and Lazenby had created. Meanwhile, in Dublin, Texas, a small town 80 miles southwest of Waco, an anomaly persisted. The Dublin Dr. Pepper Bottling Company had been operating since 1891, making it the oldest Dr. Pepper bottler in existence. When franchising began in 1925, owner Sam Houston Prim had been given first choice of territories. He chose to formalize an existing smaller region rather than expand. The Dublin plant had refused to follow the rest of the industry when, in the late 1970s and early 80s, American soft drink manufacturers switched from cane sugar to high-fructose corn syrup. Owner William P. Closter insisted on continuing to use Imperial pure cane sugar, believing it produced a superior taste. The bottles that came off his antiquated 1930s equipment carried the Dublin name and attracted a devoted following. As many as 80,000 visitors traveled to the small town each year to tour the facility and purchase cases of the original recipe soda. For decades, the parent company tolerated this eccentricity. Dublin Dr. Pepper accounted for less than 1% of annual sales. The cult following generated positive publicity, but tensions mounted as the Dublin bottler began selling outside its approved 44-mile radius, shipping cases across Texas and through its website to customers nationwide. In June 2011, Dr. Pepper Snapple Group, the entity that had been spun off from Cadbury Schweppes in 2008, filed a trademark infringement lawsuit against the Dublin bottler. The suit demanded that the company remove Dublin from its labels and cease selling beyond its franchise territory. The lawsuit generated national attention. Consumers rallied around the small bottler, viewing it as a David battling a corporate Goliath. A legal defense fund was established, but the outcome was perhaps inevitable. On January 12, 2012, the Dublin Dr. Pepper Bottling Company settled the lawsuit. Dr. Pepper Snapple acquired all of the Dublin bottler's sales and distribution operations. The company was renamed Dublin Bottling Works. 14 of its 40 employees were laid off. The last run of Dr. Pepper to be produced in Dublin, 75 cases, came off the line the previous afternoon. Dublin Dr. Pepper, the original recipe soda that had been produced continuously for 120 years, ceased to exist. Dr. Pepper Snapple would continue to distribute a cane sugar version of the drink, but it would carry no reference to Dublin on the label. The oldest bottler was gone. 6 years later, in July 2018, Keurig Green Mountain acquired Dr. Pepper Snapple Group for $18.7 billion. The combined company was renamed Keurig Dr. Pepper. The drink that Charles Alderton had invented in a Waco drugstore was now controlled by a conglomerate whose primary business was single-serve coffee machines. But in Waco, something had been preserved. On May 11, 1991, exactly 38 years after the tornado that had devastated downtown, the Dr. Pepper Museum opened its doors in the restored Artesian Manufacturing and Bottling Company building on 5th Street. A group of concerned citizens, recognizing the historical significance of the structure, had worked throughout the 1980s to save it from demolition. The building had sat vacant for decades, its machinery removed, its artesian well capped, its neighborhood officially declared blighted. The renovation was extensive, but the Romanesque arches remained. The 18-inch brick walls still stood. The lighter-colored bricks that marked the tornado damage were still visible. The museum was dedicated not only to Dr. Pepper, but to the story of the soft drink industry and the principles of free enterprise. It collected artifacts, bottles, signs, coolers, memorabilia, that documented the company's evolution from a single drugstore fountain to a global brand. It preserved the history that the corporate owners had never seemed particularly interested in preserving. Charles Alderton's name appeared on the museum's exhibits. His photograph hung on its walls. More than a century after he had walked away from the drink he created, he was finally acknowledged as its inventor. The man who had died in obscurity in 1941, attended only by his second wife, buried by Masons in Oakwood Cemetery, was given a place in the narrative from which he had been so conspicuously absent. The building survives. The formula survives. The company that owns it bears no resemblance to the enterprise that created it. This is the nature of American commerce. Products outlast the people who make them. Brands outlast the companies that build them. And history is preserved, not by those who profit from it, but by those who care enough to remember. The building on 5th Street still stands. Visitors enter through the same doors that workers used when the bottling lines were running, when trucks loaded with cases of Dr. Pepper pulled away each morning to supply the fountains and stores of Central Texas. The artesian well has been partially excavated, visible now as an exhibit rather than a functioning water source. The machinery is gone, replaced by display cases and interpretive panels that tell the story of a drink and the people who made it. Charles Alderton has no grave marker that identifies him as the inventor of Dr. Pepper. His headstone in Oakwood Cemetery records only his name, his dates, and his Masonic affiliation. The company he inadvertently helped create never acknowledged him during his lifetime. He never sought acknowledgement. He walked away from the formula in 1891 and spent the next 50 years as a working chemist, watching from a distance as the drink he had created spread across the country. The reasons for his silence remain unknown. Perhaps he simply lacked interest in the business side of the enterprise. Perhaps there were agreements, never documented, that prevented him from claiming credit. Perhaps he was content to have contributed something to the world without needing to be recognized for it. The historical record offers no answers. It offers only the fact of his absence, from the company's leadership, from its advertising, from its official history. The museum has attempted to correct this. Alderton's photograph hangs in the recreated drugstore exhibit. His name appears in the timeline of the company's development. School groups learn that a young pharmacist, experimenting with fruit syrups at a soda fountain, created the formula that would become America's oldest major soft drink. The erasure has been at least partially undone, but the larger pattern persists. Dr. Pepper was built by men whose names have been largely forgotten: Alderton, Morrison, Lazenby, O'Hara, and is now owned by a conglomerate that sells coffee machines. The formula has survived every corporate reorganization, every leveraged buyout, every merger and acquisition. It has outlasted the buildings where it was first produced, the advertising campaigns that promoted it, the executives who managed its growth. It exists independent of the institutions that claim ownership of it. This is what endures, not the companies, not the headquarters, not the stock prices or the market share. What endures is the thing itself, the taste that Charles Alderton created in 1885, the 23 flavors that have never been publicly identified, the mystery that has persisted for nearly a century and a half. The building on 5th Street will eventually require repairs that exceed the resources available to maintain it. The museum will continue as long as visitors come and donors contribute. The formula will pass to whatever corporate entity acquires it next.